Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada on January 19th, 2026 for Reason to Resist. This past weekend, I learned from social media posts that fanatical Zionists have filed yet another complaint against me with the Law Society of Ontario. The Law Society of Ontario, or LSO, regulates lawyers in the Canadian province of Ontario, Canada's most populous province, and I'm a member in good standing of the LSO and have been for more than 20 years now. Before Israel's genocide in Gaza began in October 2023, no one had ever filed a complaint against me with the Law Society of Ontario. But since the genocide began, I have had now with this new complaint, no less than 5 filed against me by, in every single case, a person I determined or knew to be a fanatical Zionist, and in every one of these instances, the complaint related to my condemnations of Zionism and Israel. The first 4 complaints were dismissed summarily. So just so you understand how the process works, when a complaint is filed, usually that's done online with the Law Society of Ontario, an intake officer will do an initial screening of the complaint and make a preliminary assessment about whether the complaint has sufficient merit to go to a disciplinary tribunal. If the intake officer determines that it doesn't have sufficient merit to go to a disciplinary tribunal, there will be no obligation on the part of the lawyer who has been subjected to the complaint to respond to it and to defend him or herself. And it'll simply be dismissed by way of a letter delivered to the complainant by the intake officer, and that letter is then copied to the lawyer who was the subject of the complaint. And at that point, the lawyer learns for the first time. Usually, that's when the lawyer learns for the first time that that complaint was filed against him or her. If the matter is deemed by the intake officer to be sufficiently serious, then a disciplinary tribunal is convened. And a process will begin in which at some point the lawyer complained of will be called upon to justify his or her conduct, at least the conduct that is the subject of the complaint. So as I said, the first 4 complaints filed against me by these frothing at the mouth Zionists since Israel's genocide began were all dismissed summarily, and I only learned of them when I was copied on the letter from the intake officer to the complainant advising the complainant that the complaint had been dismissed summarily. Now, how the LSO will deal with this new 5th complaint remains to be seen, but I have no doubt myself that it has no merit and is designed, like the others, simply to punish me for denouncing Israel's Western-backed genocide. When I learned of this new complaint, I decided to share with our audience today the history, the long and admittedly painful history of my experiences with attacks from Zionists. It's quite a story stretching back about 10 years. And I hope that by sharing my experiences with people who fight against the injustices perpetrated by our elites, I might be able to impart some wisdom to like-minded people and comrades about the tactics that these people employ and the best way, at least as I see it, to resist and defeat those tactics. So my story today begins in 2016. And at that time, I was active in the Green Party of Canada. I had run for the Green Party of Canada in the Canadian 2015 federal election in the riding of London West. And although I lost in that election, the Green Party's leader, Elizabeth May, invited me a few months after the election to join her shadow cabinet. For those of you who aren't familiar with the British parliamentary system, the shadow cabinet is simply people appointed by the leader of a political party that's represented in Parliament to act as critics of particular ministries in the government. So in my case, I was asked to be the justice critic, and therefore it was my responsibility as a member of the Green Party of Canada Shadow Critic Cabinet to criticize, where appropriate, the policies and actions of Canada's Minister of Justice. Now, shortly after being appointed to the Green Party of Canada Shadow Cabinet as Justice Critic in 2016, I traveled to Israel in connection with a class action that I was then pursuing. That was my full-time job at the time. I was a partner in a major class actions law firm in Canada. And the class action that we were then prosecuting, or one of them, concerned the activities of a Canadian gold mining company in an East African country, Eritrea. And the allegation in the class action was that that gold mining company called Nevsun was using slave labor at that mine. And many of the people who had been forced to work at that mine had escaped Eritrea, and a significant number of them had somehow ended up in Tel Aviv. And so shortly after being appointed to the shadow cabinet, and just by chance, I happened, my trip to Israel had nothing to do with my appointment to the shadow cabinet. It was just something I needed to do in connection with my work as a lawyer. I traveled to Tel Aviv, and I met with a number of Eritreans who had worked at this mine. And then I had some extra time at the end of that series of interviews that I did in Tel Aviv. And so I accepted an invitation to go to the West Bank, the occupied West Bank, from a friend of mine, a Palestinian Canadian friend who at the time was living and working in Bethlehem. And I was so distressed by what I saw that I immediately upon my return to Canada in or about April of 2016, I authored a proposed resolution inside the Green Party of Canada calling for the party to support the use of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, to bring an end to Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people. So I authored that resolution, and in advance of the party's biannual convention in August of that year, and began to advocate for it within the party and to try to persuade my fellow party members to vote for this resolution at the biannual convention in Ottawa in August. And the moment that I did that, and it became known to the leader that I was doing that, the leader, Elizabeth May, became very concerned and expressed to me the fear that we would be attacked by the Zionist lobby as anti-Semites if we were to endorse the use of boycott, divestment, and sanctions to bring Israel's oppression of Palestinians to an end. Despite her concerns, I told her that I was determined to proceed with this resolution and that I disagreed with her position, and I felt that as a matter of conscience, this was something the party should do. And so as soon as it became known to the Zionist lobby, somehow it was leaked to them that I had brought forward this resolution inside the party and was going to be advocating for it at the biannual convention. The party, or B'nai B'rith Canada, one of the more outspoken and aggressive Zionist lobby groups, began to target me. And it was actually the first time in my life that I had ever been accused of either anti-Semitism or support for terrorism by anybody, to my knowledge. I had never had to encounter such allegations before. And what B'nai B'rith did was they had a staff member compile research on me. And in the course of doing that research, which was essentially an in-depth review of my public commentary, they discovered that while I had been in Israel in April of that year, I had met with a Palestinian lawyer by the name of Mohammed Alayan, whose son had been killed in the course of what Israelis alleged was a terrorist attack against settlers in East Jerusalem. And the Israelis, after killing Mohammed Alayan's son, refused to turn his body over to the Alayan family. And a number of other Palestinian families in East Jerusalem were in the same predicament. One of their children had been killed by Israeli forces, and the Israelis had refused to turn the body over. And so Mohammed Alayan, being a respected lawyer in East Jerusalem and being in this predicament himself, agreed to act as a representative of these Palestinian families and to negotiate with the Israelis for the return of their bodies. The Israelis were constantly imposing, he told me when I met with him in Jerusalem in 2016, onerous conditions on the return of the bodies. For example, that the funeral be held only at night, that it last no more than 10 minutes, that nobody be invited to the funeral. And ultimately, after Mohammed Alayan consulted with his clients, he decided to inform the Israelis that they rejected the conditions. And at that point, the Israelis, he told me, showed up at his house and destroyed it, rendering his entire family, he had 8 or 9 surviving children, homeless. And at the time that I met with them, they were living in a tent beside the rubble of their home. So on a social media post on Facebook, when I learned of this, and while I was still in Palestine, I condemned what the Israelis had done to the Mohammed Alayan family home. And for this, I was accused by B'nai B'rith of being a supporter of terrorism. Initially, they didn't say this publicly. What they did was they took their dossier on me, which included my Facebook post about the Alayan family home being destroyed, and they took it to a private meeting with Elizabeth May and urged her to expel me from the shadow cabinet because, according to them, I was expressing support for terrorism. Initially, Elizabeth May resisted the admonition of B'nai B'rith that I be expelled by the shadow cabinet, but as I'll explain in a moment, she ultimately capitulated and did just that. In the interim, the party held its biannual convention in August of 2016. I argued vigorously in favor of the adoption of the BDS resolution. Elizabeth May stood up on the convention floor and opposed the adoption of my resolution. And because there were so many people within the Green Party who felt strongly about supporting the Palestinian cause, the resolution passed despite Elizabeth May's opposition by a significant margin. Now, as soon as that happened, as soon as it passed, Elizabeth May told the national media that she was deeply distressed by the passing of the resolution and that she was considering resigning from the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. And at the same time, the then leader of the British Columbia Green Party, a character by the name of Andrew Weaver, a climate scientist who is a Zionist and a neocon, he began to attack me and the others who had taken the lead in sponsoring and promoting this resolution in the media and describing us as extremists and insinuating that we were anti-Semites, although he didn't quite come out and say that publicly, and distancing himself from the Green Party of Canada. And when I responded to his public attacks by authoring an op-ed in an alternative media outlet defending the resolution and criticizing him for his Zionist tendencies, at that point, Elizabeth May did expel me from the Green Party of Canada shadow cabinet. Now, ultimately, she still wanted to get rid of the resolution, which had been adopted in August, but she was mindful of the fact, I think, that the resolution had a great deal of support. And so what she managed to do was to get the Federal Council of the party to convene an emergency special meeting of the members in December of 2016 to reconsider the resolution. And in between August and December, there were intensive negotiations that took place. And while these negotiations were taking place, I was on one side of the negotiating table. Elizabeth May was on the other side. We were trying to find a compromise to avoid a big, ugly fight at the special meeting in December. While that was happening, I undertook a national tour to promote the resolution and to try to persuade the party's members to uphold it at the December special meeting. And in the course of doing that, there were various attempts made to persuade the venues where I was speaking across the country to cancel my speaking engagements. And one of them actually did. The Unitarian Church in Calgary, Alberta, came under such intense pressure from Zionists that they ended up canceling my speech at their venue in about October or November of 2016. Nonetheless, momentum was building for a defense of this resolution. And in that context, Elizabeth May agreed to a new resolution, which omitted the acronym BDS, but explicitly endorsed the use of boycott, divestment, and sanction, and a whole bunch of other measures, in fact, to defend the Palestinian cause. So in many ways, even though it was cosmetically different, the new resolution, because it didn't actually have the acronym BDS in it, it was even stronger, a stronger defense of the Palestinian cause than what had been adopted in August of 2016. And that resolution was overwhelmingly adopted, this new resolution, by the Green Party of Canada members in Calgary, Canada, in December of 2016. And here on the screen, you can see the report, one of the many reports that appeared in the corporate media after the August 2016 resolution being adopted in Ottawa, in which Elizabeth May is said by the Hill Times to be devastated by the Green Party's adoption of the so-called controversial BDS policy. And then here you can see from the fall of 2016, a report in an independent media outlet called Ricochet explaining why Elizabeth May had expelled me from the shadow cabinet. And finally, after the December 2016 meeting, where we ended up adopting a resolution that was even stronger than the one in August of 2016, the Electronic Intifada published an article by Canadian author and activist Eve Engler titled "Canada's Greens Stand Up to Pro-Israel Bullies." And this is really where my long and, shall we say, interesting interactions with the Zionist community in Canada began. And over time, as I'm going to explain, they repeatedly escalated their attacks on me. So the next chapter in this saga is that in 2017, I was approached by a friend and colleague in the Green Party of Canada who had supported the BDS resolution. His name is David Kattenberg. At that time, he lived in Winnipeg. He's a member of the Canadian Jewish community, a strong supporter of the Palestinian cause. And he told me he wanted to build on the momentum that we had established within the Green Party for BDS by pursuing litigation against the Canadian government relating to the labeling of wines produced in Israel's illegal settlements and sold in Canada. Those wines at the time bore product of Israel labels, even though the wines were produced in the occupied West Bank, which is considered to be Palestinian territory by the international community, or virtually the entire international community. And even though the Canadian government itself explicitly acknowledged at that time and up until the current time that the West Bank does not form part of Israel and is occupied territory. So we commenced an action. I commenced an action on David's behalf in the Federal Court of Canada, asking the federal court to declare that these product of Israel labels violated Canadian consumer protection law because they were false, deceptive, and misleading. And ultimately, we persuaded a judge of the federal court trial division, I believe it was in 2018 or 2019, she issued her decision that, in fact, these labels violated Canadian law. That judge, prior to being appointed to the bench, had been the chairperson of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. So this was somebody who was highly respected in the human rights community in Canada. And when her decision was issued, it so enraged the Zionist community that a character by the name of Botich Shmuley, who I think holds himself out as a rabbi, and many of you, if you're involved in the Palestinian cause, will have heard of him before. He's based in the United States and is one of the most crazed Zionists in the English-speaking world. He took out a full-page ad in the New York Times slamming the Canadian federal court, accusing it of anti-Semitism. And here you can see a photograph of the article. A full-page ad in the New York Times. One can only imagine how much this cost. And you might not be able to see it up at the top there, but what it says at the very top of this page in the New York Times is that this ad was rejected by Canada's leading newspapers, namely the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, and the National Post. Even the National Post, which is fanatically pro-Israel, and pretty much the Globe and Mail is too, refused to publish this article because it just flatly smeared this highly respected judge who had rendered the decision before the in the federal court in support of our claim that these labels were violative of Canadian law. This litigation, by the way, is still ongoing after all these years because the government has fought it tooth and nail through appeals, and the saga continues. But nonetheless, this is a chapter in the story which caused a considerable amount of consternation in the Zionist lobby in Canada. Now, as all of this was going on, as we were litigating this case, B'nai B'rith Canada continued to attack me, this time publicly. It and a spokesperson, a person who was a spokesperson of the organization at the time, repeatedly called me throughout 2017 a supporter of terrorism. So ultimately, around the seventh time that this happened, I felt I had no alternative but to sue B'nai B'rith Canada for defamation, which is what I did. And B'nai B'rith responded to my defamation lawsuit by bringing what is known as an anti-SLAPP motion. SLAPP means a strategic lawsuit against public participation. Ontario had just adopted a legislation which provided for the dismissal of SLAPP suits. And in an early test case under that legislation, the Ontario Court of Appeal dismissed B'nai B'rith's anti-SLAPP motion in my defamation lawsuit. And then they brought an application, B'nai B'rith did, for leave to appeal the decision of the Ontario Court of Appeal. They brought that application to the Supreme Court of Canada. And as you can see here from the Toronto Star article of October 2020, the Supreme Court of Canada rejected the leave to appeal application of B'nai B'rith Canada. And shortly thereafter, I and B'nai B'rith Canada agreed to settle the lawsuit. I can't say more than this, that the defamatory statements were retracted by B'nai B'rith, and their insurer agreed to pay my legal fees. And that was the end of that particular saga. Now, while all of that was going on, I was continuing to have to respond to attacks from Zionists and Zionist politicians in other contexts. And in particular, in 2018, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he was the Prime Minister at that time and right up until 2025, publicly accused me of anti-Semitism. And here you can see an article in September 2018 in the Times of Israel, where it is said that Trudeau slammed me, somebody who is described in this article as an anti-Israel activist. And the background of this particular smear by the Prime Minister is as follows. In 2018, B'nai B'rith Canada was launching vicious attacks against the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, which was and had been for some time a principled and staunch supporter of the Palestinian cause. So I, being a fan of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers and a couple of other people, decided to organize a protest in defense of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers outside of the headquarters of B'nai B'rith Canada in Toronto. And when we showed up there, a number of virulent pro-Israel lunatics showed up and, ostensibly for the purpose of defending B'nai B'rith Canada. Not that there was any threat to B'nai B'rith Canada. There was absolutely no threat to them. We were there simply to express our a dissent and our displeasure at the smears that the organization was launching at the union. After that protest, two of the more extreme people who had shown up there published statements in which they were threatening with beheading a couple of members of the Liberal Party caucus, the caucus of the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, because they were perceived by these pro-Israel extremists to be too sympathetic towards the Palestinian people. And now, there were two MPs in the caucus of Justin Trudeau at that time who were, I think, who could fairly be described as the most aggressive advocates for Israel in the entire Canadian Parliament. And those two MPs were Michael Levitt and Anthony Housefather. Levitt is now the CEO. He left politics and became subsequently the CEO of another rabidly pro-Israel group in Canada, the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. The other character, Anthony Housefather, continues to remain in the caucus of the Liberal Party, now led by Mark Carney. And let me tell you about how extreme Anthony Housefather is in his support for Israel. Last year, he actually threatened, during the genocide, he threatened openly, publicly, to cross the floor and join the opposition Conservatives because he felt that the Liberal Party was not being sufficiently pro-Israel. He did that actually, I believe it was in 2024, not 2025. And at the point in time in which he made that threat, the Liberal Party was, the Liberal government was allowing Canadian weapons producers to send military equipment to Israel in violation of international law. It was allowing Canadian citizens to serve in the Israeli military. It was according charitable status to Zionist organizations in Canada that were funneling money to organizations affiliated with the Canadian military. It was conferring trade benefits, not only on businesses in Israel proper, but also on businesses that were illegally in the occupied West Bank. And I could go on and on. The Liberal government was so supportive of Israel that it even suspended funding for UNRWA based on unsubstantiated allegations of Israel's genocidal regime, that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, was engaged in terrorism, or certain of its employees were. And the Liberal government did this during the genocide, and even though the perpetrator of the genocide did not adduce an iota of credible evidence to support the allegation. So this is how extreme the Liberal government was in its support for Israel at the time that Anthony Housefather complained publicly that it wasn't sufficiently supportive of Israel and threatened to cross the floor to the opposition Conservatives. At the time at which this whole brouhaha erupted in 2018 during our protest in front of the headquarters of B'nai B'rith Canada, Michael Levitt was the president of the Canada-Israel Parliamentary Group, and Anthony Housefather was the vice president. So that's the background. At that point, when I saw this, call by these two extremist supporters of Israel for the beheading of a couple of members of the Liberal Party caucus, MPs who were deemed by them to be, pro-Hamas, even though they weren't even remotely supportive of Hamas, and really were very tepid in their support for the Palestinian people. At that time, instead of condemning the extremists who threatened, with violence, deadly violence, people who were in the Liberal Party caucus, what did Housefather and Levitt do? They condemned us, the people who had showed up at the protest to condemn B'nai B'rith for its smears of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. So this prompted me to put out a tweet. And in the tweet, what I said was that Housefather and Levitt appeared to be more devoted to Israel than to the government of Canada, to their own governing party. And it's at that point that the Prime Minister put out a tweet accusing me of having directed at his two MPs a vile anti-Semitic slur. And by the way, the same accusation was leveled against me by the leader of the official opposition, a clown by the name of Andrew Scheer. Now, to be very clear about this, my comment about Housefather and Levitt had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that they were Jewish. It had everything to do with their ideological orientation and their fanatical Zionist commitment to a state that at that time was committing apartheid and a host of other war crimes and crimes against humanity against the Palestinian people. And nonetheless, the Prime Minister lied, at least by implication, if not explicitly, suggesting that the reason why I had said this about these two MPs was because they were Jewish. That had nothing to do with it. I would have said the same thing about anybody, regardless of their Jewish or ethnic profile, if they were, fanatical in their commitment to the Zionist entity, so much so that they were willing to subordinate the interests of Canada or their government to the agenda of Israel. So in any case, after this happened and I was smeared by Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer, I came under pressure from well-meaning people, some well-meaning people in the Palestinian Solidarity community to retract my statement and to issue an apology. And after a lot of careful consideration, I decided I wasn't going to do that. The smear was just that, a smear. It was baseless. As I said, my criticism of these two MPs had nothing to do with their ethnicity or religion and everything to do with their record of fanatical Zionism. And in retrospect, especially after having viewed how these two individuals conducted themselves, Housefather and Levitt, throughout this genocide, and refusing to utter a peep of criticism about Israel, and constantly pressuring the Canadian government to be even more supportive of the genocidal entity, no matter how damaging that is to Canada's reputation on the world stage, no matter how destabilizing that may be for the region of West Asia. I am absolutely convinced that my criticism was entirely justified, and that a retraction would have been completely unwarranted and the wrong move. So whether or not people like it, I stand 100% behind, to this very day, behind what I said about Housefather and Levitt. When these various smears failed to silence me, Zionists began to engage in physical intimidation. In 2019, I spoke at a protest condemning U.S. support for Israel in Toronto. The protest took place across the street from the United States consulate in downtown Toronto. And when I and other protesters showed up there, we encountered a group of counter-protesters who were led by a character named Mayor Weinstein. And just in case you aren't familiar with Mayor Weinstein, there he is. Mayor Weinstein, this is from a January 2020 article published in the New York Post. Mayor Weinstein was the head at that time of the Canadian branch of the Jewish Defense League, which in the year 2000, or around the year 2000, was described by the FBI as a terrorist organization. And the New York Post published an article about Weinstein back in 2020 because he went to the United States, to New York City to be precise, in order to confront Black leaders leaders of the Black community who were apparently too critical of Israel for Weinstein's liking. So when we showed up at this protest in 2019 in front of the U.S. consulate, and we found Mayor Weinstein and a bunch of other Jewish Defense League lunatics there screaming obscenities at us. And after I spoke at this protest, I walked about a mile to a hotel where I was staying during my brief visit to Toronto. And when I got to my hotel, I checked in. Then I went down to the gym on the mezzanine level to work out. And when I came out of the gym, there was a small room where there was a couch. It was kind of like a little lounge area. And there was one person sitting in that lounge area just outside of my gym, and it was none other than Mayor Weinstein, who looked up at me with a sly grin on his face. And frankly, the only way, to my mind, that Mayor Weinstein could have found himself at that particular place at that particular moment was that he followed me back to the hotel. And I actually did engage him in conversation for a while. I accused him of following me to the hotel. He didn't deny it, nor did he admit it. He made some crackpot remark about having actually checked into the hotel himself. I later made inquiries. I asked the reception to connect me with Mayor Weinstein and was told there was no such person staying in the hotel. And so I do think that what this was intended to do was to send me a message that they knew where I was and that I needed to watch out. And the next series of attacks came the following year in 2020, when I decided to run for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. And from the moment that I announced my decision to run early that year, I was inundated with hostile commentary from Zionists across the country. And the Green Party of Canada itself came under intense pressure to exclude me from its leadership contest through the vetting process. I had to file a lengthy application, as did all the other candidates. It was reviewed by an anonymous 3-person vetting committee who were given broad discretion to exclude people from running if they thought it was contrary to the interests of the party that they run. And in May of that year, I was advised by the vetting committee that my application for approval as a candidate in the leadership contest had been rejected. Now, ultimately, I decided to file an appeal from that decision, and I succeeded in that appeal and was allowed back into the race, but not before having to explain in considerable detail my advocacy on behalf of the Palestinian people to the vetting committee, because in the letter they sent to me to advise me of the rejection of my candidacy, every single reason they cited was related to my advocacy for the Palestinian cause. So eventually, however, I persuaded them to allow me into the race. And at that point, when their decision granting my appeal was announced to the public, the attacks from Zionist lobby groups and Zionists across the country only intensified. Then, on the eve of the vote in the Green Party of Canada leadership contest, Global News, which is radically pro-Israel, this is a national news organization in Canada, decided to publish a hit piece on me. And here you can see the title of that article. It's a screenshot of the article. On eve of leadership choice, Canada's Greens confront anti-Semitism in their ranks. And the article was based almost entirely upon the smear that Justin Trudeau and the leader of the opposition had leveled against me in 2019, I believe it was. The person you see featured here in this article is Annamie Paul. Annamie Paul ultimately won the 2020 leadership contest. There were 8 candidates in that race. I finished second place with about 45% of the vote on the 8th and final ballot. And this article, it's not an exaggeration to say, I think, that this article may have actually changed the outcome, because this is a national news organization. This was quite a serious smear that they leveled at me, repeating the outrageous remarks of the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. And the remarks, the criticism of the Prime Minister and the leader of the official opposition were echoed in this article by Global News by not only Annamie Paul, my primary opponent in the leadership contest, but also by the person who she replaced as leader and who later returned to the leadership, namely Elizabeth May. And so this is by no means, by the way, the only hit piece that the national corporate media has published against me as a result of my advocacy on behalf of the Palestinian cause. And so ultimately, this person, Annamie Paul, became the leader in late 2020. During the leadership contest, Annamie Paul was asked repeatedly, as were others, about the BDS resolution that had passed in late 2016, and overall about the party's position with respect to Israel and Palestine. And she always found a clever way to avoid answering the question in any kind of a meaningful or comprehensible manner. It was very clear that she didn't want people to know what her position was on this issue. And she was also very critical of me and what I had said about Housefather and Levitt. Now, I formed the opinion during the leadership contest, even though she was quite evasive about what her position was, that she was in fact a closet Zionist, and that people were going to find out what her true position was with respect to Israel and Palestine if she became leader. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened in 2021. In May of that year, during the first full year of Annamie Paul's leadership of the Green Party, Israel launched another one of its brutal assaults on the Gaza Strip. And at the time that it did that, the Green Party of Canada had 3 MPs. One was Elizabeth May, another was a person by the name of Paul Manley from British Columbia, and a third was Jennifer Atwin, from the Maritimes. And at the time that Israel began its brutal assault on the Gaza Strip in May 2021, both Paul and Jenica publicly accused Israel of apartheid and condemned their attack on the Gaza Strip. Now, at that time, Annamie Paul's principal spokesperson and advisor was a lunatic by the name of Noah Zatzman. And she had appointed him to that position. He wasn't elected to that position. Nobody even knew who Zatzman was in the Green Party. He was entirely new to the party as far as we could tell. And when Jenica Atwin and Paul Manley accused Israel of apartheid publicly, Zatzman, then the spokesperson and chief advisor to Annemie Paul, publicly attacked them and accused them of anti-Semitism. People who were there, who were MPs of the Green Party of Canada, were smeared by the Green Party of Canada's own leadership office through this person, Noah Zatzman. And rather than condemn Zatzman, rather than rein him in, rather than fire Zatzman, Annemie Paul allowed him to continue for weeks on end to defame Paul Manley and Jenica Atwin, ultimately causing Jenica Atwin to quit the party's caucus and to join the governing Liberal Party caucus. Paul Manley remained within the Green Party, but later that year in the next federal election, he lost. And after he lost, Zatzman publicly boasted about having participated in a campaign to ensure the defeat of Paul Manley in Canada's federal election. Now, when this happened, a huge controversy erupted in the Green Party. People were understandably outraged that the spokesperson of the leader was publicly defaming 2 out of our 3 MPs simply because they had condemned Israel's apartheid regime with complete justification. And when many Green Party members became upset with Annemie Paul for not reining in Zatzman and stopping him from smearing our MPs, she began to accuse the membership and certain people within positions of power and influence in the party of being a racist against her because she was a Black Jewish woman. And every day, for weeks on end, she publicly accused the party itself of racism towards her. And ultimately, this train wreck within the Green Party of Canada caused the party in the next federal election, held about a year after Annemie Paul assumed the leadership of the Green Party of Canada, to suffer its worst result in decades. And after that result, in the aftermath of it, Annemie Paul resigned from the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. So she lasted in that position for about a year. Her Zionism did in fact turn out to be both radical and a catastrophe for the Green Party of Canada. And the Green Party of Canada has never recovered since then. To this very day, the only MP it has is Elizabeth May. And in the last federal election, it garnered less than 2% of the popular vote, which is well below the level it had enjoyed for some 15 years leading up to the era of Annemie Paul. Annemie Paul herself disappeared from public view after the 2021 federal election and her resignation from the Green Party of Canada. But a few weeks ago, she resurfaced when a minister in the genocidal Israeli regime published a photograph of various Zionists from Canada meeting with this minister in Israel. And there was Annemie Paul with a smile beaming across her face in Israel, supporting the genocidal entity as it carried out its genocidal project in occupied Palestine. This brings us to the past 2 years. By the time we get to 2024, the Zionist lobby in Canada probably had realized that smearing me wasn't going to be sufficient to deter me from working in support of the Palestinian cause. So they decided to escalate. And they did this first by going after me professionally. As I mentioned at the outset, it began in 2024 with the first complaint ever filed against me with the Law Society of Upper Canada. As I mentioned, that complaint was dismissed summarily, but was soon followed by 3 more, all of which were also dismissed summarily. Now, I'd like to be able to give you details of those complaints, but I can't. I can't identify the complainants, and I can't tell you the specifics of what they had to say because the Law Society of Ontario imposes that obligation on me. The theory is that if I, as the subject of the complaint, can publicly disclose the identity of the complainant and disclose the specifics of their complaint, that might deter people from filing complaints against lawyers, and the Law Society doesn't want to deter them from doing that. But what I can say is that I was able to determine that all of them were very supportive of Israel. In fact, two of them are very well known. The two of the complainants are very well known supporters of Israel in Canada. And I can also say that all four of the complaints related to my advocacy for the Palestinian people and my criticisms of Zionism. But also, it wasn't just the complaints. The other way in which they went against, that the lobby came after me professionally, is that my law firm, the firm of which I was a partner in 2024, was inundated with complaints and hate mail relating to my work in the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. That law firm, Kalogli & Myers, was a four-partner law firm with which I had been working since 2019. And my three partners in that law firm are younger than me, and I became concerned because of the level of vitriol that was being directed at the law firm, that my work on behalf of the Palestinian cause was going to negatively impact the livelihood of the three other partners of the firm. And so I approached them and expressed to them a desire to withdraw from the partnership because I didn't want to compromise their ability to make a reasonable living from the practice of law. And they accepted readily my recommendation, and we remain on very good terms. They did not ask me to leave. They certainly didn't force me to leave. This was something that happened on my initiative. But as I say, it was something that I felt obliged to do because of the level of hostility that was being directed at the law firm for work that I did outside of my responsibilities as a partner of Kalogli & Myers. Now, and you can see here, by the way, an article written by the Global Green News publication about my resignation from Kalogli & Myers back in March of 2025. None of these tactics deterred me from continuing to provide pro bono legal services to Palestinian Canadians and to supporters of the Palestinian cause in Canada, nor did they cause me to become silent with respect to the Zionist crimes against the Palestinian people and other peoples of the region of West Asia. And so the Zionists in Canada and elsewhere decided to escalate yet again. And they did so this time by calling for my arrest. The first such incident occurred when I was in Cyprus last year. In my capacity as a journalist, I went there to report for Reason to Resist on the massive influx of Israelis into this island nation. And as part of my investigation, I did some filming outside of a Jewish center in the Cypriot city of Larnaca. And while I was filming out there, I was approached by a security guard from the Jewish center who told me that I couldn't film even though I was standing in a public street, and demanded that I delete the video from my photographic device. I refused to do that. I told him I was a journalist and that there was no law against doing what I was doing. So a couple of days later, after I'd finished my reporting and I tried to depart the country at Larnaca Airport, I was told by a border official that I had to miss my flight because there were police officers from the criminal division of the Larnaca police that wanted to interrogate me. And so I did miss my flight. They came to the airport and they interrogated me. And they advised me that the reason why they wanted to inquire about my activities in Cyprus was because the Jewish center in Larnaca had complained about my filming outside of the center on a public street. And ultimately, they let me go. They didn't charge me with anything, but they did refuse to reimburse me for the plane ticket that I had to purchase to replace the one that I had lost as a result of being detained at the airport. I had an even more unpleasant experience a few months later when I was in Amman, Jordan. The reason why I had gone to Amman was primarily to enter into the occupied West Bank across the Allenby Bridge, which joins Jordan and the occupied West Bank. But when I tried to do that, I was barred by officials of the genocidal Israeli entity from entering Palestine. This was the fifth time I had tried to enter Palestine, and it was the first time I had been prevented from doing so. So I went back into Jordan and decided to report instead on the presence of Israelis in the country and the dealings between the Jordanian monarchy and the genocidal Israeli regime. And I tried to film a part of a report about 100 meters from the Israeli embassy in Amman, and on a public street again. And the moment I pulled out my camera, I was swarmed by Jordanian police and security officials, some of whom were not uniformed. And I was taken to a police station where I was tossed into a jail cell with some people who had been charged with petty crimes and held there for a number of hours until I demanded to be allowed to speak to the Canadian embassy to request consular assistance. And at that point, I was allowed to leave without any charges being leveled against me. More recently, Zionists here in Canada have demanded that I be investigated by Canadian law enforcement for using the phrase globalize the Intifada. And here you can see a post on X from Honest Reporting Canada. In the post, they're sharing an article from a national newspaper, the National Post, which, as I've said on prior episodes of Reason to Resist, is fanatically pro-Israel, has repeatedly published hit jobs on me. And in this post, which tags the Canadian Security Intelligence Services, which is Canada's version of the CIA, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is Canada's version of the FBI, I, along with a few other journalists, are identified as people who are threatening the national media by directing at them the phrase globalize the Intifada. Now, just so you know, nobody from this was published on December 22nd. So it's, about 4 weeks ago. Nobody from law enforcement has contacted me about any of this. And I would be very surprised if they do that. But nowadays, you can't take anything for granted, folks, particularly with the evident sympathy that many people in law enforcement have for the genocidal entity. Throughout this entire time, by the way, I have received repeatedly death threats on social media. In fact, I received death threats on X just over the past 2 days, and they were in connection with my interview of Iranian professor Mohammad Marandi, published this past Saturday. We were talking in that interview not only about the riots in Iran and the U.S. threats against the Islamic Republic, but also about the involvement of the Mossad in those violent riots, and about the prospects of further attacks on Iran by Israel and the United States. And we also talked about Donald Trump's so-called peace board and his appointment of various war criminals and con men to that body, the body of which he will serve as the chairperson. So these threats, I'm going to share a couple of them with you. These were replies to my post on X about my interview of Professor Marandi. Somebody who goes by the name of Lord Crypto on X said, "You both are dead men," and then again said, we're coming for all the regime and its followers and its supporters and whoever gave them a platform to speak their lies. Baldly, we Iranians will find you and not forget you all on the list. And then somebody who goes by the handle of Patriot, in reply to my post about my interview with Professor Marandi, said, "One day sooner than later, a true patriotic Iranian in Canada will find you, Dimitri." And I could, show you plenty of other examples, some of them much worse than this, some including grisly videos of people being executed. But I think that'll give you a flavor of the threats that I've had to deal with in the time that I've been advocating for the Palestinian cause. So this brings me back to the point at which I began this report, and that is with the fifth and most recent complaint against me filed with the Law Society of Ontario. I learned of this complaint from none other than Mayor Weinstein. Here you can see Weinstein, by the way, disbanded the Jewish Defense League in Canada because of its association with terrorism, and he started a new organization called Israel Now. And on, I believe it was Sunday, just this past Sunday, yesterday, he issued a post in which he said, "I have been informed that the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation has filed a complaint of professional misconduct with the Law Society of Ontario against Alexander Dimitri Lascaris for conduct unbecoming a lawyer, specifically counseling mischief." And I'm going to get back to that in a second, what this is all about. And you can see underneath that the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation responded and said, "We at the organization confirm the above." So they're publicly stating that they have filed a complaint against me with the Law Society of Ontario. Because they've gone public, I don't consider myself bound to avoid identifying them. They decided on their own to identify themselves as a complainant. I have not actually seen the complaint, but based upon the post by this terrorism-loving charlatan, Mayor Weinstein, it has something to do with counseling mischief. And I think what they're referring to here is a post that I put out a couple of days earlier, and here it is, involving a character by the name of Natasha Hausdorff. Natasha Hausdorff. Natasha Hausdorff is a barrister in the United Kingdom who formerly worked for a Wall Street law firm, and she's with an organization called UK Lawyers for Israel. She studied at both Oxford and Tel Aviv University. Her father is an Israeli, and she spends much of her time running around the world lying about the legality or illegality of Israel's treatment of the Palestinian people. And so some Zionist lobby groups arranged for this character, Natasha Hausdorff, to speak at an event in Toronto. I would go to that event and disrupt it myself, except that I can't be in Toronto on February 2nd when she's scheduled to speak. And even if I tried to go, they probably would bar me from going because I would have to register. And every time I have to register for some Zionist event, I'm invariably prohibited from entering the facility. So instead of trying to go there myself, which would have been an exercise in futility, I put out a post and encouraged other like-minded people to go to the event and disrupt it. And I was very careful to say that they should disrupt it non-violently. And as a result of this, a widely read, a newspaper that's widely read in the Jewish community here in Canada called theJ.ca published an article about my post on X and said that my post on X was circulating amongst people in the Jewish community in Canada who were deeply concerned about my call for nonviolent disruption, except that the media outlet, this Zionist media outlet, omitted to mention that I had specifically said that the disruption should be nonviolent. Now, because I put this post out calling for people to disrupt this event, evidently the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation has decided to accuse me of conduct unbecoming a lawyer, of professional misconduct, and of counseling people to engage in mischief, which is a criminal offense in Canada. I believe that this fifth complaint filed against me with the Law Society of Ontario will suffer the same fate as the prior four, which is to say that it will be dismissed summarily. But if it isn't dismissed summarily, I assure the complainant and all others who may be contemplating taking similar steps against me that I will defend myself vigorously, and I will not be deterred from offering pro bono legal services to the victims of Israel's genocide and those who support its victims. In fact, just this morning, I received excellent news about a Palestinian Canadian professional whom I represent. Like me, that Palestinian Canadian has had multiple complaints filed against him with his professional organization. Like me, he's obliged not to disclose the identities of the complainants or the particulars of the complaints, but I can tell you that it all relates to the fact that he has been condemning Israel. And the news that we received this morning is that the latest complaint filed against him has been dismissed by his regulatory body, with no further action being taken against him. Now, in conclusion, for as long as I breathe and I'm capable of thinking and expressing myself, I will continue to condemn and oppose the crimes of Western governments and its proxies and allies. After a decade of Zionist attacks, I have one overwhelming piece of advice to offer to comrades in the fight for justice, wherever they may be, and that is never retreat, never go on the defensive, and never show any weakness. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada on January 19th, 2026.